Chapter 5: The Tax Collector. In those days when Lord Teyl's reach extended far into the eastern marches, there walked the roads a man called Arend who collected the Lord's taxes with cold precision. He was a man of ledgers and laws, who believed the world could be measured in columns of numbers and kept in proper order. With him travelled two guards, Gunnar and Rolf, men who saw the world not in numbers but in aching feet and empty bellies, and who wished only for a warm fire and a full plate at day's end. Arend the tax collector was a man of thick ledgers and cold calculation. He saw the world in columns of numbers and lines of writ, all neatly ordered and accounted for. His two guards, Gunnar and Rolf, saw it in aching feet and empty stomachs. They were weary of the road, and the sun was dipping low in the sky, promising a cold night ahead. "Look at that fellow, Rolf," Gunnar grumbled, gesturing with a calloused thumb. "What in the name of all the powers is he doing?" Ahead of them, on the dusty road, a lone figure stood engaged in the strangest ritual they had ever witnessed. The man, a traveller they had been following at a distance for some time, held a walking stick high in the air, its tip pointed toward the sky, and stood thus for a full minute, stock still as a statue. Then he glanced at the tip, pulled a piece of paper from a satchel, and made a small mark on it. After that, he reversed the stick, pressing the gnarled end into the ground, waited again, and then made another mark. He then took a few dozen paces down the road and repeated the entire bizarre process. "Looks like a fool to me," Rolf muttered, shifting the weight of his spear from one shoulder to the other. "Or a madman touched by something unnatural. He doesn't look like a bandit, though." Arend, who had been so focused on finding a good spot to make camp before nightfall, had paid little mind to the man before, but now he saw the paper. He, Arend, and the scribes in the great houses and temples were the only people he had ever seen with reason to carry such a thing. Common folk had no use for writing, no right to it. "A fool?" Arend scoffed, his voice tight with outrage that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his belly. "He holds a quill and paper in his hands and makes marks like he has the right to such things. Paper is for ledgers and records, for the Lord's business and the temple's accounts, not for some vagabond to scribble on in the dust like a child playing at being learned. Who gave him permission? Who is he to carry such things?" Gunnar and Rolf exchanged a look, the sort of look men share when their master is working himself into a fury over nothing. They had no opinion on the proper use of paper. Their concerns were more immediate: finding camp, building a fire, filling their bellies. "Perhaps he's a clerk," Gunnar suggested with a tired sigh. "Lost his way from some lord's household." "He's writing a letter, most like," Rolf added without much conviction. "Nonsense," Arend snapped, the indignation in his voice rising like water coming to boil. "He is not a clerk. He is not a scribe or a scholar. Clerks don't wander the roads alone with sticks, making notes on the very dust itself. What's he doing? Counting the road? Measuring shadows? He's a peasant with a stick and a piece of paper, and that is an offense against the natural order of things." Arend's mind raced with possibilities, each more troubling than the last. The man with the paper was a challenge to everything orderly and proper, a disruption he couldn't abide. He had to know what was being written, and he had to put a stop to it. "We are not making camp just yet," he said, his voice hard as iron. "We are going to have words with that man." Gunnar's face was a study in weary resignation. He gave Rolf a look that spoke volumes. "He's a madman, Arend. Harmless, most like." "We should make camp whilst there's still light," Rolf grunted in agreement. "My belly's been grumbling louder than thunder, and my feet feel like they're made of stone." "There's no crime in being a fool," Gunnar added, trying one last time to dissuade their master. "Let him play with his stick and his paper. What's it to us?" But Arend saw it as everything. He saw not a madman, but an insult to the very order of his world. A peasant with paper was like a farmer wearing a crown, a transgression against the way things ought to be. He felt a hot, righteous anger building in his gut, the kind that demanded action. The kind his father had felt when he'd beaten Arend's mother for speaking her native tongue, for whispering prayers to old gods instead of the proper temple deities. He didn't have the authority to condemn a man on a whim, but the feeling was there, a violent impulse he struggled to contain. He had to find a reason. He had to make this right. "It's an insult," Arend hissed, his voice trembling with a fury his guards didn't share. "It's a mockery of my work, of the Lord's authority, of all that is orderly and proper. Don't you understand? I am the only one with the right to record the land and its people in this domain. This man is a fraud, and frauds lead to rebellion and chaos. Now we go and we learn what he is writing before he can corrupt anyone else with his pretensions." Reluctantly, their faces showing clear disdain for this pointless errand, Gunnar and Rolf followed. They walked with a slow, deliberate gait, keeping their distance from Arend, letting him walk his righteous path alone. The confrontation. Arend's face was a grim mask as he approached the silent traveler. His anger simmered just below the surface, ready to boil over at the slightest provocation. Well, he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension like honey from a broken comb. "A man of letters, are we? You have the look of a beggar, yet you carry the tools of a lord. A stick and a piece of paper, marking the roads as if they belonged to you. Are you plotting against the Lord? Or perhaps you've simply lost your wits in the sun, you filthy vagabond." He stopped, hands on his hips, his gaze a challenge. "I am Arend, the Lord's tax collector, and you will explain your actions. Now." The traveler looked up from his work, and his deep blue eyes held a weary patience that somehow made Arend even angrier. "Oh, will I now?" he asked, his voice low and utterly without fear. He looked Arend up and down, taking his measure. "Let me ask you something first. Are you a grumpy tax collector the locals call Big Snot?" Arend's face went scarlet as a cock's comb. His mouth opened to roar in fury, but no sound came out at first. He had never heard that name spoken aloud, not in his presence, but it felt sickeningly true. The image of the peasants he so despised whispering and laughing behind his back, mocking him in their hovels, filled him with a rage so potent it was like a physical blow. His hand went instinctively to his dagger, fingers wrapping around the hilt. He wanted to silence this man who had the gall to speak such a name. "You dare to insult me?" He finally managed to snarl, his voice thick with unbridled rage. The traveler just tilted his head, his face a mask of polite innocence that was somehow worse than any sneer. "Oh, not at all," he said, the words cutting with surgical precision. "It's the locals who refer to you as such, not I. I merely repeat what I have heard spoken in every village and tavern from here to the eastern marches." Arend saw red, but behind the traveler, he caught sight of Gunnar's shoulders shaking with silent laughter and Rolf's hand covering his mouth as he turned his head away. The humiliation was complete. His men, his very own guards, were laughing at him. The vagabond had not just insulted him. He had exposed his deepest fear, the one he had spent a lifetime trying to bury beneath a veneer of superiority and authority. He had not attacked Arend's body, but his pride. And in Arend's mind, that was a far greater crime than any blade could commit. The tirade. Arend's face, already crimson with fury, twisted into a mask of pure rage. He took a heavy step toward the traveler, gravel crunching beneath his boot like bones breaking. "Big Snot," he bellowed, his voice a raw, grating sound that sent birds fleeing from nearby trees. "You dare to stand there with a beggar's garments and a liar's tongue and give a man such a name? I am Arend. I am the Lord's hand on this land. I am order and law and reason made flesh. And you are nothing. A vagrant. A filthy vagabond without home, purpose, or proper name. You crawl on our roads and pretend to be learned, scribbling your nonsense on paper as though you had a right to it." He jabbed a finger at the traveler's worn pack. That is not a scholar's satchel. It's a beggar's bag, and you are no true cartographer. You are a sorcerer, a practitioner of dark arts who whispers to stones and scribbles down curses on innocent paper. You are a plague on this land, poisoning the minds of peasants with your useless tricks and your blasphemous writings. I have seen your kind before. They make the people weak with their fantasies, and they plot against rightful authority. You are a deceiver, a spy perhaps, sent by rival lords to spread confusion. Or worse, one of those Eastern cultists we've been hearing about, measuring the land for some dark purpose. Arend's chest heaved with the force of his tirade. His guards looked on from a respectful distance, their faces bored and empty of emotion. They had seen Arend in a rage before, but never one so personal, so unhinged. They were a silent audience to his self-destruction. You are naught but a liar, Arend finished, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss. You will confess your true purpose, and then you will beg for mercy for your offenses against my lord and my station. The traveler looked at him with those deep blue eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was calm as still water. Tell me, tax collector, why does your liver pain you so? Why are your eyes gone yellow at the edges? Arend stumbled back as though struck. How did this vagabond know? The pain in his side had been growing worse for weeks, a dull, grinding ache that sometimes left him breathless. He had told no one, shown no sign. How could a beggar on the road know such a thing? You are dying, the traveler said softly, and now his voice held something like pity. 3 years, perhaps less. The yellow in your eyes tells the tale clear enough for any who know how to read such signs. It's your liver, eating itself from within. But I can also see you have a son scarce 8 winters, if I judge right. He should not lose his father to pride and rot. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small piece of parchment. On it he wrote something in quick, flowing script, but the script was not in the common tongue. It was in another language entirely, one that made Arend's blood run cold. It was his mother's tongue, the language of the eastern provinces, the one he had spent years trying to forget, to bury beneath his new identity as a proper citizen of this realm. Here, the traveler said, handing him the parchment. Take this to a physician who knows the old ways. The remedy is written there, in the tongue your mother taught you before she died. Arend took the parchment with shaking hands. He stared at the words, and they swam before his eyes. How did this man know? How did he know about the pain, about his mother, about the son he'd fathered on a washerwoman and tried to forget? Who? What are you? Arend whispered. The traveler didn't answer. He simply turned back to his measurements, as though Arend were no longer worth his attention. Making camp. The sun was touching the horizon now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Gunnar cleared his throat. Master Arend, he said carefully, we should make camp. It'll be full dark within the hour. Arend, still clutching the parchment, nodded mutely. The rage had drained from him, leaving only confusion and fear in its wake. They found a suitable spot just off the road, a small clearing with a fallen log to sit on and dry wood for a fire. The traveler, apparently unconcerned by the earlier confrontation, gathered his papers and walked to the same clearing. He said nothing, asked no permission, simply sat on the opposite side of the fire pit as though he had every right to be there. Gunnar and Rolf exchanged another look should they drive him off, but Arend waved a hand weakly. Let him stay. What did it matter now? They built the fire as the last light faded from the sky. The traveler produced food from his pack, hard bread and dried meat, and ate in silence. Arend sat staring into the flames, the parchment still clutched in his hand. After a time, Rolf spoke. He was a veteran of the border wars, a man who had seen 20 winters of fighting. His curiosity had finally overcome his usual reticence. The singing swords, he said abruptly. They're real, aren't they? The traveler looked up from his meal. Aye. They are real. I've heard tell of them, Rolf continued. Blades that make a sound when drawn, not just the scrape of metal on leather, but something else. A hum that gets into your bones and makes a man hesitate. The smith in Barrow's End, Guntram by name, they say he takes weapons somewhere to have them enhanced. That he rides east 4 times yearly with a cartload of steel and comes back with weapons that are more than just steel. The traveller nodded slowly. Guntram is a fine craftsman. He understands that steel is not merely metal, but a thing that can hold purpose and intent. Superstitious nonsense, Arend muttered, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Gunnar leaned forward, interested despite himself. I know Guntram. He's just a man, strong arms and a good forge, nothing more. But it's true that before he brings the finished swords to the Lord, he takes them east into the fields. Says he gives them their final polish, always at night. The stories say he goes to a tower, but I've never seen proof of it. The stories are not exaggerated, the traveller said quietly. Something is indeed done to those blades. They are taught to sing. Arend, still reeling from the revelation about his sickness but needing desperately to reclaim some sense of control, cleared his throat. He forced a thoughtful expression onto his face and spoke with the cold, detached logic that had always been his shield against uncertainty. A song doesn't kill a man, he said, his voice strained but steady. A sword's worth is in the quality of the steel and the skill of the arm that wields it. To put extra labor or material into making it sing would be an inefficiency. It's frivolous. It's a waste of the Lord's resources, and an insult to a weapon's true purpose, which is to be a tool of war and nothing more. The vagabond looked at Arend and smiled faintly, not with mockery, but with a kind of sad understanding. A burden is what it is, he said, his voice quiet. To teach a sword to sing is to tame the very essence of its making. It's to pour one's own weariness and purpose into the steel, to make it part of a greater work. It's a terrible burden, not a waste. He shrugged, as if to say the matter was settled and required no further discussion. Arend's face flushed with renewed fury. This vagabond was not just a beggar, he was a philosophical fool who spoke in riddles. The demonstration. The vagabond, however, didn't wait for a response. He reached out a hand and, with a calm assurance that infuriated Arend anew, gestured toward the tax collector's belt. Your dagger, he said. May I see it? Arend's hand went instinctively to the weapon. It was a serviceable blade, nothing special, purchased from a peddler years ago, used mainly for cutting rope or paring fingernails or occasionally threatening peasants who were slow with their payments. It was dull and chipped from years of neglect. Why? Arend asked suspiciously. To prove a point, the traveller said. To show you that a weapon is not just a tool, but also a story that can be rewritten. Against his better judgment, or perhaps because some part of him desperately wanted to see this vagabond proven wrong, Arend drew his dagger and held it out. First, the vagabond said, try to cut through that. He pointed to a thick piece of wood from the fallen log, a branch as thick as a man's wrist, hard and dry. Arend, eager to prove his point, placed the blade against the wood and pushed down with all his strength. The dull edge slid off the hard surface with a grating sound. It wouldn't bite, wouldn't cut, barely even scratched the bark. The wood is too old, Arend said, a lame excuse escaping his lips. The blade's not meant for. Try the rope, then, the vagabond interrupted, pointing to a thick, knotted rope they'd been using to tie down packs. That should be easier, Arend, his pride wounded, held the blade to the rope and sawed at it with short, frustrated motions. The dull edge caught on the coarse fibers but wouldn't cut through. After a dozen strokes, he'd barely frayed the outer layer. His face twisted in frustration. It's what I said, he spat. A tool is but a tool. This dagger is not suited for such work. It needs sharpening, which I haven't had time for. "Give it here," the vagabond said, holding out his hand. Reluctantly, Arend handed over the weapon. The traveler held the dagger for a long moment, examining it in the firelight. His eyes half closed, and his lips moved in what might have been words or might have been merely breath. His hand hovered over the blade, not touching it, but so close that the three men watching could see no gap between flesh and steel. The air itself seemed to shiver for a moment, like heat haze on a summer road. Then the vagabond opened his eyes and set the dagger down on the log between them. "Now," he said, "let all three of you try it. Starting with you, Rolf." Rolf, his curiosity now fully aroused, picked up the dagger. It looked the same, still dull, still chipped. He pressed it to the thick branch that had defeated Arend. The blade sank into the wood like it was soft cheese. With barely any pressure, it cut clean through, leaving a smooth, perfect edge as though the branch had been sawn by a master carpenter. Rolf's eyes went wide. "By all the powers," he breathed. "Now the rope," the vagabond said. Rolf held the dagger to the thick, knotted rope. One smooth motion, barely more than a touch, and the rope fell into two perfect pieces, the ends so clean they looked as though they'd been cut with a razor. "Gunnar," the vagabond said. "Your turn." Gunnar, his face showing his disbelief, took the dagger and tried the same tests. The wood, the rope, both cut as easily as cutting through water. The blade met no resistance, made no sound save a faint whisper as it passed through the fibers. "Now you, Arend," the vagabond said quietly. "Try it one more time." Arend took the dagger with trembling hands. It felt the same as it always had, familiar weight, familiar balance. But when he pressed it to the wood, when he drew it across the rope, it cut as it had never cut before, effortlessly, perfectly, impossibly. He stared at the severed rope, then at the cut branch, then at the dagger in his hand. The edge was still dull and chipped, showing no sign of sharpening, no evidence of what it could now do. The breaking. Arend's fury deflated like a punctured bladder. All the rage he had nurtured, all the pride he had held onto like a shield against the chaos of the world, it simply vanished like morning mist before the sun. He had no words, no explanation, no protest that wouldn't sound like madness. The vagabond had not used a flashy spell or summoned lightning from the sky. He had simply proven, in a quiet and undeniable way, that everything Arend believed about his orderly world was a lie. The rules he thought governed reality were nothing more than suggestions, easily rewritten by those who knew how. Arend dropped the dagger. The sound of metal hitting dirt was the only thing that broke the silence. His world built on the solid foundation of ledgers and laws, of numbers that always added up correctly, of a hierarchy that put everyone in their proper place, had not just shattered. It had been revealed as an illusion, a child's drawing of order imposed on chaos that cared nothing for such pretensions. The sobs came without warning, ugly, raw sounds torn from somewhere deep in his chest. He didn't know why he was crying, couldn't have explained it if commanded to do so under threat of death, but it felt like the only real thing he had ever done, the only honest response to having the mask of his life torn away to reveal. What? Emptiness? Truth? He didn't know which was worse. His mind, trained in columns and figures, had no framework to process what he had just witnessed. The vagabond had given him a glimpse of something beyond the edges of understanding, and that glimpse had made him completely. Rolf and Gunnar sat in uncomfortable silence, unsure what to do. They had never seen their master weep. It was like watching a mountain crumble or the sun fail to rise, a thing that should not be possible. As Arend's sobs subsided, leaving him hollow and trembling like a man with fever, a new feeling began to take root in the emptiness. It was cold and hard and dangerous. He thought of his mother's tongue, the words he had long forgotten in his effort to become a proper citizen of this realm. He thought of the old gods she had whispered about when she thought no one was listening. Not the tame, distant gods of the temples here, who accepted offerings and granted vague blessings, but older powers. Powers that ruled with storms and blood and the deep places beneath the earth. He remembered a name, a half-whispered prayer he hadn't thought of in decades. And suddenly, the pieces of his broken world began to fit together in a new and terrifying pattern. His liver pain not a coincidence, but a warning. A punishment from old gods who had seen his arrogance, his rejection of his mother's ways, and chosen to humble him. His humiliation on this road not a random encounter, but a sign, a message written in shame and impossibility. The vagabond was not truly a vagabond at all. He was a prophet, a vessel for the forgotten gods, a man who spoke their language and wrote their truths for those few who were meant to see. And Arend, humble tax collector Arend, whom peasants called Big Snot behind his back, had been chosen to receive this revelation. He had been given a glimpse of deeper truth, had been shown that the world was not the simple place of ledgers and laws he had thought it was. It was a place of unseen forces, of powers that moved beneath the surface of things like great fish in dark water. He was still arrogant, that hadn't changed. But his arrogance now had what he believed to be divine purpose. He had been a fool, aye, but now he was a believer, a convert, a man who had seen beyond the veil. And in his mind shattered and reformed into a new and dangerous shape that made him more than he had been. That made him chosen, holy, right. The warning. The vagabond, who had been watching this transformation with sad, knowing eyes, spoke one final time. "The path you are walking leads to darkness," he said quietly. "I have seen men take this turning before. They always think themselves chosen, enlightened, set apart from the blind masses. They always think their newfound certainty gives them the right to impose it on others, to force truth on those unready to bear its weight." He shook his head slowly, like a man disappointed but not surprised. "You will become dangerous, tax collector. Not because of what you know, for you know precious little, in truth, but because of what you think you know. Certainty is a weapon more deadly than any blade, and you will wield it without mercy or wisdom." He stood, gathering his papers and his pack. "I shall be gone before dawn," he said to Rolf and Gunnar, who had listened to all of this in stunned silence. "Trouble me not again, and speak not of this night to any who would believe you. It'll serve no good purpose." He walked into the darkness beyond the firelight, leaving three men sitting in the circle of its glow, two confused and shaken, one transformed and dangerous. Rolf looked at his sword, wondering what other secrets it held, what other impossibilities lay hidden in the familiar weight of steel. He picked up the blade with reverent hands and held it to his chest. Far away, he slept beneath the stars, his pack as his pillow.